Hello, and welcome to your lecture on westward expansion. Grab your student notes and use them to follow along and fill in the blanks. We've talked a lot about the North and the South and the great war that they had over the root cause of slavery. We haven't talked about another very important part of the country, the West. The West was very exciting to everyone in the United States. The government loved the idea of moving westward, getting all that land and those new resources that would make the country richer. And individual people loved the idea of moving west as well. They would go into this wild land full of opportunities to make a life for themselves, far away from the factories of the North or the farms of the South. In 1862, westward expansion really began to speed up with the passage of two important laws. The Pacific Railway Act enabled the Transcontinental Railroad to be built. It spanned the country east to west and enabled people and supplies to go westward at rates unprecedented in the nation's history. All of a sudden, the West was accessible. The Homestead Act of 1862 offered to sell anybody 160 acres of federal land out west for the low price of $18, $10 for the land, 8 for the fees. This made moving west affordable to just about everyone, and so people bought the land and moved out west with no idea of what the land was actually like. When faced with harsh winters and crops that often failed, many of them headed back home. But you know who stayed? Immigrants, many of whom had come straight from foreign countries to the United States to build a better life for themselves. There were so many immigrants taking advantage of the Homestead Act that in 1870, 39% of Montana's population was foreign born. Here's the thing. People are moving out west, they're getting their 160 acres and moving out west. Doesn't that make it sound like no one is living there? But of course, there were people living there. The Native Americans were living there. And so conflicts begin to arise between the settlers and the Native Americans. So the Native Americans had, of course, been living on this land for hundreds and hundreds of years, and they had been steadily moved westward by the United States government through a series of unfair and often broken treaties. Basically, the US government would go to a tribe or tribes of Indians and say, hey, let's make a deal. You give us this land, and we will let you continue to live on all this land forever. Okay? And if the Native American said, I'm not sure, I kind of like living here, the government would say, well, you can take our deal and move, or we can kill you. Which would you rather do? Oh, I guess we'll pack our bags and move, right? So this happens over and over and over again, and the Native Americans keep getting moved further and further and further westward. Well, they get tired of it, and they decide that they want to fight back. Part of the problem was that the settlers, really not just the settlers, but the Americans in general and the Native Americans had conflicting views of each other. Okay? Americans tended to view the Native Americans as savages without rights. This includes both people in the North and in the South. It was, in fact, Union generals who famously said things like, the only good Indian is a dead Indian. For their part, the Native Americans tended to view settlers as a dangerous threat to their way of life. One side says savages without rights, the other side says dangerous threat to way of life. You can see how that might end poorly. Not only were their views of each other incompatible, their lifestyles were also incompatible. The settlers were farmers, and as farmers, they needed a piece of land that was their own, and they needed to fence it to protect their crops from wild beasts. Wild animals were also a danger to them because they could destroy crops. The fewer of them, the better. However, the Native Americans were hunters. They wanted wide open spaces with no fences where they could roam freely. Wild animals were essential to them as a source of food and of clothing. They needed them. So on the one hand, Yay fences, boo wild animals. On the other, yay wild animals, boo fences. Incompatible. That's not going to end well. And it didn't. The misunderstandings, anger, and hatred on both sides led to a cycle of violence. A cycle of violence is when one violent act leads to another and another and another, and each act only deepens the hatred and the fear on both sides, making peaceful reconciliation and just compromise more and more difficult, if not impossible. It's no surprise, then, that one of the major effects of westward expansion was that Native Americans were eventually confined to reservations, areas of unwanted land set aside specifically for them to live on. The land in these reservations was often poor. The Native Americans were unable to continue their traditional lifestyles for the most part, or even to make a living at all, and many of them did end up becoming dependent on the United States government for food and supplies because of that. One of the more positive effects of westward expansion was that those western areas were settled and there were many new opportunities for immigrants and other people to make a new and better life. One of the unexpected effects was because there was so much land out west, the farms became very large and farming became industrialized. There were bigger farms, there were new machines and new methods to make farming more productive, and so all of a sudden the United States was able to produce more food more efficiently than ever. Moving west remains an exciting prospect for many Americans today. That's why we have so many out-of-staters moving in. We are here in this beautiful state because of westward expansion, and so it's our responsibility moving forward to remember the problematic past and move forward with respect for all people and for the beautiful land in which we live. Thank you. I'll see you next week.